If you've seen the headlines, you've probably heard that President Trump just ended protections for thousands of Afghan refugees, including Christians fleeing Taliban persecution. But that's not the full story. The reality is more complicated and the moral urgency is far greater. What the media initially failed to report was that these individuals were never under temporary protected status to begin with. They were granted humanitarian parole by the Biden administration, a temporary emergency measure that expired and was never designed to be permanent. That status has now expired. Among those affected are hundreds of Christians who fled the Taliban, many of whom converted after the US withdrawal in 2021. And while the moral case for protecting them is clear, the legal process matters too, and that's exactly where the Trump administration is drawing the line. I'm going to be breaking all of this down and more because this isn't about open borders or blanket deportations. It's about correcting a broken system left behind by Biden's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, and making sure the US immigration system operates within the law, not emotional headlines. And now, Christian leaders are calling on President Trump to correct what they say was a mistake made by the Biden administration and to prove he's serious about protecting religious freedom. On April 10th, the Department of Homeland Security issued notices effectively ending humanitarian parole for roughly 9,000 Afghans. That gave many of them just days to leave the country, including some who had already filed for asylum or special immigrant visas. The news broke during Holy Week, just as millions of Christians around the world were reflecting on Christ's suffering and sacrifice. That timing ignited a moral outcry from pastors, nonprofits, and faith leaders who say the US is about to betray some of its most vulnerable allies. These are Christian brothers and sisters who risked everything, said one member of the Enduring Hope Alliance, a group that helped rescue Afghan converts. We're not asking for open borders, we're asking for a scalpel, not a hammer, a temporary pause to protect lives. According to coalition memos, there are hundreds of Afghan Christians currently in the US under expired humanitarian parole. Many converted from Islam after arriving here and are now legally subject to the death penalty under Taliban rule. One such man, identified by the alias Nashinas, fled Afghanistan after being tortured by Taliban forces. He has resettled in North Carolina, became active in a local church, and filed for asylum. But despite that, he received a formal notice from DHS ordering him to leave the US. Faith groups say his case isn't unique. Afghan Christians are in a more vulnerable position today than even Christians under ISIS, reads a report by Help the Persecuted. Sending them back would be the equivalent of signing their death warrant. Much of the public confusion over this case comes from sloppy reporting and political spin. Several outlets initially claimed that President Trump ended temporary protected status for Afghans. That's false. In reality, the Afghans affected were never under TPS. They were granted humanitarian parole under the Biden administration, a temporary emergency measure that carries no path to citizenship and is not renewable unless extended by DHS. But multiple media outlets and even DHS officials in early statements incorrectly referred to it as TPS. This mislabeling fueled the false narrative that Trump abruptly canceled legal protections that had existed for years. To make matters worse, some commentators portrayed Trump's policy as a blanket deportation of refugees without due process. That's also untrue. Many of the affected individuals, especially Afghan Christians, still have pending asylum or SIV applications. Those legal pathways are still available, and Trump's DHS has said they will be adjudicated on a case-by-case basis. The media also ignored the fact that Biden's 2021 parole program bypassed the normal immigration process entirely. It brought in thousands without vetting for long-term status. And now that the temporary window has expired, those people are left in limbo. That's not Trump's fault, that's a Biden-era policy failure. The August 26, 2021 suicide bombing at Kabul's Abbey Gate that killed 13 U.S. service members remains a defining failure of the U.S. withdrawal. Faith leaders argue this is a chance for the Trump administration to fix one of the most painful consequences of that Biden-era decision: abandoning persecuted Christians. This controversy is the direct result of a policy failure from the Biden administration, according to Trump-aligned groups. Biden's Afghanistan withdrawal left thousands of allies stranded, and those who made it to the U.S. were brought in under an emergency parole program, not a long-term immigration plan. Mike Menina, a former Bush White House official who led rescue efforts for Afghan Christians, put it bluntly: the Afghanistan withdrawal was one of the darkest chapters in American foreign policy. But what followed was one of our finest hours. Every day, Americans stepped up to save lives. I'd hate to see that work undone. Now, Christian leaders say Trump has a second chance to lead and to correct one of Biden's worst foreign policy legacies. There's been a lot of confusion about what legal protections these Afghans had. Many news outlets incorrectly claimed that Trump ended temporary protected status. That's false. These individuals were under humanitarian parole, a short-term emergency status that offers no path to citizenship. TPS is a separate legal category, typically granted to nationals from countries experiencing war or natural disaster. It also offers only temporary protection. Asylum, however, is different. Asylum seekers go through a legal process, and if granted, they receive permanent protection under U.S. law. Trump's position is clear. The U.S. must respect lawful immigration, and asylum is the proper avenue for anyone fearing persecution. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt clarified this.
The administration ended some temporary protections for Afghans, including several hundred Christians who have been punished by the Taliban. Is the president considering any exceptions for Afghans who could face death or torture if they return to their home country?
So let's just be clear about one thing. We didn't end that proactively. It expired, and it's because the previous administration illegally paroled millions of people, or hundreds of thousands of people, into the country, and then gave them temporary protective status, which again is a temporary status. It's not a permanent status in this country. And if there are individuals here who came in through the Biden administration who want to claim asylum, there is a legal process to do that, and those cases will be adjudicated by a judge on a case-by-case basis. We have a legal immigration process in this country for a reason, and all this administration is trying to do is effectuate that.
Now, this also comes at a time when the Trump administration is launching a broader crackdown on anti-Christian bias in government. Attorney General Pam Bondi just announced a new presidential task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias, saying this.
We're excited to be here for the launch of the task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias as outlined in the President's executive order. Joining me today are members of the task force and individuals who have been impacted by the anti-Christian bias. Together, this task force will identify any unlawful anti-Christian policies, practices, or conduct across the government, seek input from the faith-based organizations and state governments to end anti-Christian bias, find and fix deficiencies in existing and regulatory practices that might contribute to the anti-Christian bias. As President Trump has stated, the Biden administration engaged in an egregious pattern of targeting peaceful Christians while ignoring violent anti-Christian offenses. The president is right. Biden's Department of Justice abused and targeted Christians. Pro-life Christians were arrested and imprisoned for peacefully praying outside abortion clinics. The FBI spied on traditional Catholics in their parishes. President Biden declared Easter Sunday to be Transgender Day of Visibility. No longer.
Faith leaders say this is more than rhetoric. Trump is listening. He's receiving direct pressure from pastors and rescue organizations urging him to halt deportations, at least temporarily, for Afghan Christians. A memo sent to the White House asks for a 90-day pause and proposes a vetted and qualified exemption list for Christians most at risk. So far, DHS has not publicly confirmed any pause, though Reverend Franklin Graham said he believes the deadline may be extended into July. Trump has a decision to make. He can either continue letting DHS proceed with deportations under the current legal framework, or he can intervene, pause the removals, and demand a process that protects persecuted Christians. Keep in mind, Trump's critics are constantly demanding he abides by legal due process. Josh Yusuf of Help the Persecuted put it this way: "We know Christians were beaten, imprisoned, and even killed by the Taliban. Now, as some of those same people face deportation, President Trump can take a scalpel, not a hammer, and protect those at real risk of death for their faith. This is Good Friday. It's unthinkable to send Christians back to a country where they could face their own crucifixion. This is a defining moment. It's not just about immigration, it's about whether America will stand by those who risked everything to follow Christ, and whether our laws will reflect not only justice, but mercy." That's the show for today. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And hey, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss tomorrow's show. As always, thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay fired up, and I'll see you in the next one.